What's up, Crim Heist? Welcome to another criminology educational video. And today, we will be discussing the subject of institutional corrections. So first is the development of prison. So what are the early prisons back then? So unang-una dyan yung Mamertine Prison. It is an early place of confinement in Rome in 64 BC using primitive dungeons built under the main sewer. So ibig sabihin sa Mamertine Prison, yung place of confinement niya ay nakalagay sa ilalim ng lupa or under the main sewer. Next is sanctuary. Asylum that placed the wrongdoer in seclusion or arrest in cities followed by Christian church. Pag sinabi nating seclusion, siya ay ina-isolate natin. Since the time of Constantine, placing the wrongdoer in seclusion to create an atmosphere conducive to penitence is common. So, very common daw ang paggamit ng seclusion as a way of punishing the offender or the wrongdoer. So, this form of imprisonment was modified into more formalized places of punishment within the walls of monasteries and abbeys. So, early workhouses is the bridewell. So, a workhouse created for the employment and housing of London's riffraff in 1557 and was based on the work ethic that followed the breakup of feudalism and increased immigration of rural populations to urban areas. So, yung mga workhouses daw, ito yung tinatawag natin na yung mga nakakulong or yung mga wrongdoer ay pagtatrabahuhin nila. It is very successful by 1576 wherein Parliament required the construction of a bridewell in every country in England. The same unsettled social conditions prevailed in Holland and the Dutch began building workhouses in 1596 that were soon to be copied all over the Europe. So what are the early cellular prison? Nandiyan ang Maison de Force, Hospice of San Michel, and Walnut Street Jail. Pag sinabi nating Maison de Force, a Belgian workhouse for beggars and miscreants, designed to make profit by an enforced pattern of hard work with both discipline and silence. An important rule is that if a man will not work, neither let him eat. So, ibig sabihin, dito sa Maison de Force, yung papakain sa'yo o ikaw ay makakakain lamang if ikaw ay nagtatrabaho. Therefore, if you are not productive, if you are not working, if you are not cooperating, if you are not cooperative, you will not eat. Okay? Next is Hospice of San Michel, a correctional facility designed for incorrigible boys and youth, and included silence. Large work areas and separate sleeping cells, both expiation and reform were intended goals. Next is Walnut Street Jail. Pag sinabi nating Walnut Street Jail, it is originally constructed as a detention jail in Philadelphia, created by the Quakers. It was converted into a state prison and became the first American penitentiary. So pag tinanong, what is the first American penitentiary? That is Walnut Street Jail. Okay? Lagi nating tatandaan, pag tinanong sa board exam or pag tinanong sa examination, ang magiging sagot natin dyan is Walnut Street Jail. So, balikan lang natin dito kay Hospice of San Michel. When we say expiation kasi, it is a reparation of guilt or yung pagbawi or tawag dito, ito yung bawi or hustisya na ibinibigay or ito yung kumbaga yung it is a way of amending or reparating the guilt action or the wrongdoing of the person. Pag sinabi naman nating reform, of course, that is baguhin. Okay? Now, let's go to the difference between Auburn versus Pennsylvania prison system. Pag sinabi nating Auburn prison system, it is established in 1819, and the main feature of this prison system is the confinement of the prisoners in a single cell at night and congregate works in shop during the day. So, ibig sabihin si Auburn prison system, sila ay confined in a single cell pag sila ay natutulog. So, meron sila sa kanya-kanyang cell pag sila ay natutulog and sila ay maghahalo-halo or maglalabo-labo to congregate work in shops during the day. So, yun yung difference ng Pennsylvania prison system mamaya. A prison model consisting of small individual cells, large work area for group labor, and enforced silence. So, sa tingin natin, bakit maliit ang mga individual cells at malaki ang area for working? Kasi nga, according kay Auburn prison system, small individual cells because it can only cater one prisoner. Okay? Kasi nga kada gabi, sila ay isa-isa, may sarili-sarili silang selda at sa umaga, pag sila ay kailangang magtrabaho, sila ay naglalabo-labo sa working area. Later innovations at Auburn were lockstep, marching in single file, placing the right hand on the shoulder of the man ahead and facing towards the guard. The strip suit, 2-foot extensions of the walls between cells, and special seating arrangement at meals, all designed to ensure the strict silence. So the very essence is to have a silence. The Auburn and Pennsylvania systems were both based on the belief that criminal habits were learned from and reinforced by other criminals. See also the Pennsylvania system. So, ibig sabihin, si Auburn Prison System and si Pennsylvania Prison System, sila ay naniniwala na ang mga kriminal daw ay gumagawa ng krimen sapagkat ito ay natutunan nila. Okay? So, external factor kung saan all crimes or criminal behavior are learned. And it is reinforced through what? Maaring ito ay na-enforce sa influence of other criminals or maaari ring through interaction with other criminals. As to Pennsylvania prison system naman, it is established in 1829 and this prison system requires solitary confinement. So, ibig sabihin, umaga-gabi, mag-religious instructions, matulog, magtrabaho, sila ay nasa solitary confinement. So, walang interaction between one another. An early prison system requiring inmate silence, individual cells, and inmate labor in those cells. Although this prison system aroused great international interest, it was adopted by only 2 other states, which is the New Jersey and Rhode Island, but later on abandoned the system. In contrast, many European countries wholeheartedly adopted the Pennsylvania model. Si William Penn, the founder of the Pennsylvania and a system of justice that required compensation of victims and repentance to restore the offenders to God's grace, Penn is also the leader of the Quakers, who brought the concept of more humanitarian treatment of offenders to America, but lays in Italy and England through its influence such advocates as Beccaria and Howards. Diba si Beccaria, Howards, they tend to advocate or they pioneered or they fight or rather they fought for a more humanitarian treatment. Kaya nga di pa pumasok ang classical theory. So, lagawin lang nating ratio. Ang Auburn prison system, they have a single cell kung saan doon sila matutulog. So, one person or one prisoner, one cell. And then, at day, when they need to work, sila ay nagsasama-sama. Unlike dito kay Pennsylvania prison system, solitary confinement all throughout. Umaga-gabi, magtrabaho, matulog, kumain, etc. Okay? Note, the great law or the body of laws of the Quakers that saw hard labor as more effective punishment than death penalty for crimes and one that demanded compensation to victims. So, ibig sabihin, dito daw sa body of law ng Quakers, mas pinagtuunan nila ng pansin yung pagtatrabaho na lang or hard labor as a way of punishing and compensating the bad doing of the criminal. Compared with other harsh colonial codes in force at that time, the great laws of Quaker was quite humane. Kasi nga naman, ikumpara mo naman yung hard labor sa death penalty, of course, it is more humane nga naman na magkaroon na lang ng hard labor kaysa ikaw ay patayin. This body of laws envision hard labor as a more effective punishment than death for serious crimes, and capital punishment was eliminated from the original codes. Now let's go to the Age of Enlightenment. In the 18th century, in a century of change, it is the period of recognizing human dignity. It is the movement of reformation, the period of introduction of certain reforms in the correctional field by certain people and gradually changing the old positive philosophy of punishment to a more humane treatment of prisoners with innovative programs. Dito daw sa Age of Enlightenment, onti-onti nang na-echapuera yung mga capital punishments, torture, death penalty, and they substituted it to a more innovative, humanitarian, or humane programs, or humane way of correcting or reforming the offender. Unahin na natin si William Penn. So, di ba nga si William Penn, being the leader of the Quakers, kung saan isa sa mga code nila, which is yung Great Law, kung saan mas nakafocus sila sa hard labor, which is more humane nga naman than death penalty. So, he fought for religious freedom and individual rights, and he is the first leader to prescribe imprisonment as correctional treatment for major offenders. So, he is also responsible for the abolition of death penalty and torture as a form of punishment. Next is Charles Montesquieu. So, si Charles Montesquieu naman, he is rather a French historian and philosopher who analyzed law as an expression of justice. He believes that hard punishment would undermine the morality and that appealing to moral sentiments as a better means of preventing crime. Okay? So sa tingin niya raw, yung mga harsh punishment, it violates the morality. And therefore, alam naman natin na ang batas o isa sa mga basihan ng batas is of course morality. Okay? Or the morals in the community. Next is Voltaire. Si Voltaire naman, he was the most versatile of all philosophers during this period. He believes that fear of shame was a deterrent to crime. He thought that legality sanctioned practice of torture. So, Voltaire involved in a number of trials that challenged the old ideas of legalized torture, criminal responsibility, and justice. Next is si Jeremy Bentham. So aside from the philosophic calculus and one of the proponents of the classical criminology, the greatest leader in the reform of English criminal law, he believes that whatever punishment designed to negate whatever pleasure or gain the criminal derives from crime, the crime rate would go down. Diba? Bentham was the one who devised the ultimate panopticon prison, a prison that consists of a large circular building containing multi-cells around the periphery. It was never built. Okay? So, si Jeremy Bentham, sinasabi niya nga dito na ang punishment is a way of negating the pleasure or gain na maaaring makuha ni criminal or maaaring maging consideration ni criminal in doing or in engaging into illegal activity. Next is John Hogwart, the sheriff of Birdsfordshire in 1773, who devoted his life and fortune to prison reform. After his findings on English prisons, he recommended the following. So, single cells for sleeping, segregation of women, so hiwalay daw ang mga babae, ihiwalay daw ang mga bata, and provisions of sanitation facilities, panatiliing laging malinis ang mga correctional facilities. Abolition of the fee system by which jailers obtain money from prisoners. So, he is an English high sheriff who was so appalled by jail conditions that he undertook a crusade to improve places of detention. He utilized his position to press the legislation to alleviate some abuses or bawasan o tanggalin ang mga karahasan at ma-improve yung kalinisan at kondisyon sa mga kulungan. Next is the Reformatory Movement. So this is consisted of the introduction of certain reforms in the correctional field by certain persons, gradually changing the punitive philosophy of punishment to a more humane treatment of prisoners with innovative institutional programs. Okay? So in Europe, nauna dyan si Manuel Montesinos. So Manuel Montesinos was the director of the prisons of the Valencia, Spain in 1835. Divided prisoners into companies and appointed a prisoners as petty officers in charge. So ibig sabihin daw, hinati-hati ang mga prisoner into different companies at merong prisoner in charge. Academic classes of 1 hour a day were given all inmates under 20 years of age. So up until now, meron pa rin yung mga companies sa mga prisoners as well as academic classes or educational program in which ito ay sinimulan ni Manuel Montesinos. Next is si Domets of France. In the Domets of France, he established an agricultural colony for delinquent boys in 1839. So, nakafocus naman siya sa mga delinquenteng batang lalaki. The boys were housed in cottages with house fathers as in charge. The system was based on re-education rather than force. When discharged, the boys were placed under the supervision of a patron. As well as in England, by Alexander Macanocci, he is the superintendent of penal colony at Norfolk Island in Australia. So, inintroduce niya yung a more progressive humane system to substitute for corporal punishment. At ito yung tinatawag niya na mark system, kung saan ang mga prisoner daw ay required na magkaroon ng number of marks. He was given his ticket of leave, which is the equivalent of parole. Kumbaga, good conduct time allowance. Macanocci introduced several other progressive measures which aim at rehabilitating prisoners. So he introduced fair disciplinary trials, built churches, distributed books, allowed plays to be staged, and permitted prisoners to tend small gardens. For his progressive administration of prisoners, Macanocci should be considered one of the father of modern penology. Also, he is considered as the father of the parole system kasi nga siya yung nagpanimula nung kumbaga yung good conduct time allowance. Or kumbaga siya yung isa sa mga proponent nun. One of the most famous contributors to the Reformatory Movement was Sir Walter Crofton. He is the chairman of the director of Irish Prison. In 1856, Crofton introduced the Irish system, similar to that Maconochie's Mark system, later on called the Progressive Stage System. So may tatlong stage. The first stage of the Irish system was solitary confinement for 9 months at certain prison. The prisoners at this stage were given reduced diet and allowed monotonous work. The prisoners progressed to a more interesting work, some education, and better treatment towards the end of the first stage. The second stage was an assignment to the public works at Spike Island. The prisoner worked his promotion through a series of the grades according to a mark system and wore a badge of distinction to show his status. The purpose of the mark system and the progression through grades was to shorten the length of stay. So, depende yan sa kanyang behavior as well as yung kanyang performance. In the third stage, the prisoner was sent to Lurk or Smithfield, which was a sort of preparation for release. Here, the prisoner was without custodial supervision, so medyo malaya na, and was exposed to ordinary temptations of freedom. In the final stage was the release of supervision under conditions equivalent to present-day parole. So, merong mga parole officers that will supervise the parolee. The importance then to remember in the Irish system is that Crofton attempted to place the responsibility for self-improvement on the prisoner himself through successive stages. Kasi nga naman, hindi ka mag-a-advance ng stage kung hindi ka magbabago. If you are not going to help yourself in improving yourself and in making them believe or in making them kumbaga paniwalaan nila to be persuaded na ikaw ay nagbabago na. In 1876 naman, the New York State Reformatory at Elmira opened with Zebulon Reed Brockway. Brockway introduced in Elmira a new institutional program for boys from 16 to 30 years of age. The new prisoner was classified as a second grade and was promoted to first grade after 6 months of good behavior. Another 6 months of good behavior in the first grade qualified him for parole. If the prisoner committed a misconduct, he was demoted to third grade where he was required to show good conduct for 1 month before he could be reclassified to second grade. The Elmira system was based on the indeterminate sentence and parole. Elmira had all the elements of the modern correctional system, so that this institution is often referred to as the forerunner of modern penology. In England, Sir Evelyn Ruggles Bryce, the director of English prisons, after visiting Elmira in 1897, opened a Borstal institution near Rochedy in Kent. The Borstal Institution of England is today considered the best reform institution for young offenders. Now let's go to the concept of jail. Jail is defined as the institution for the confinement of persons who are awaiting final disposition. So lagi lang natin tatandaan, jail is a confinement of persons for detainees and those convicted offender or sentenced prisoner kung saan ang kanyang sentensya lamang ay hindi aakyat ng 3 taon. Ibig sabihin 3 years and below. Origin of jail or saan ang galing ang jail? When the first crude system of community organization began to emerge in the Stone Age, a small cave was undoubtedly designated as a holding cell for the detention of those who violated the tribal code until the elders could gather at the side of some nearby mountain to decide upon punishment. But when punishment had been determined, a restraining boulder was rolled aside from the mouth of the cave, the guilty were brought and punishment promptly meted. Until about 200 years ago, the jail was used exclusively for the detention of the accused pending trial and imposition of punishment. The punishment imposed were torture, banishment, exile, death, branding, mutilation, but never imprisonment. The jail is said to have originated in medieval England, kung saan si Henry C. in-order niya yung mga sheriff niya in each institution to spread through England in 1166, originally conceived as a place for detaining suspected offenders until they could be tried. Jails eventually came to serve as a dual purposes of detention and punishment. So, nagkaroon na ng dual purposes na hanggang ngayon, yun ang sinusunod for detention and imprisonment of below 3 years. The concept of English jail was brought to the colonies soon after the settlers arrived from the Old World. The jail was used to detain those awaiting trial and those awaiting punishments, the stocks and pillory and the whipping post being located nearby. At the start of the 19th century, Children's, debtors, inutangan, slaves, mentally ill, physically ill, were usually sent to other institutions, both pre-trial and began to be housed in jails. So what is the jail structure? In the attempt to better manage and control inmate behavior, jails have progressed through three phases of the architectural design. Each design is based on a particular philosophy of inmate management and control. Tatlo yan. Nandiyan ang first generation, second generation, and third generation jails. Pag sinabi nating first generation jails, jails were built in a linear design. Ibig sabihin, pahaba. That dates back to the 18th century. In this type of jail, ang inmate daw ay nakatira in a multiple occupancy cell. So, ibig sabihin, in one cell, marami silang inmates. The cell line corridors that are arranged like spokes. Inmate supervision is sporadic or intermittent. Staff must patrol the corridors to observe inmates in their cells. Contact between jailers and inmates is minimal unless there is an incident to which jailers must react. The biggest problem with first generation jail is the inability of an officer to see what is going on in more than one or two cells at a time. That limitation gave rise to the second generations of jail in 1960s. Sa second generation jail naman, in 1960s, nireplace niya old rundown linear jails and provide officers the opportunity to observe as much of the housing area as possible. From a single vantage point, in this type, the staff remain in a secure control booth overlooking inmate housing areas called pods. Surveillance is remote and verbal interaction with inmates is even less frequent than in first-generation jails. Property destruction is minimized because steel and cement continue to define the living areas. While staff can observe activities in common areas or day rooms, they are unable to respond quickly to problems or even to interact effectively with inmates because of the intervening security control booth. In both the first and second generation jail, ang pinakamalaking problema nila is yung staff and inmates separation. And the third generation jail, also known as the direct supervision jail, kung saan ito ay ginamit noong 1970s, the housing unit design of such jail is podular. Inmate cells are arranged around a common area or day room. There is no secure control booth for the supervising officer, and there are no physical barriers between the officer and the inmates. The officer may have a desk or table for paperwork, but it is in the open day room area. So, ibig sabihin, wala nang harang. In this jail time, the inmate style is direct supervision. An officer is stationed in the pod with the inmates. The officers move about the pod and interact with inmates to manage their behavior. The pods contain sleeping areas, day rooms, space, all necessary personal hygienic fixtures, and sufficient tables and seats to accommodate unit capacity. Dito kay third generation jail, meron ng interaction and direct supervision between the jailer and the inmate. So what are the types of jail? Nandyan ang lock-up, ordinary, and workhouse. Pag sinabi nating lock-up, usually ito yung mga ginagamit sa mga police station, kung saan ito ay security facility, usually operated by the police department for temporary detention. And usually ang detention, hindi yan umaabot ng 48 hours or hindi siya lumalagpas doon. Persons who must be held longer are transferred to the city or provincial jail. Next is ordinary jail. In most instances, ito naman yung ginagamit for offenders who are awaiting court action and serving short sentences. Sa ordinary jail naman, ito yung literal na city jail, municipal jail, provincial jail, and frequently, the only facility available for the detention of the juvenile offender and for the care of non-criminal insane pending commitment to the state psychopathic hospital. It may be administered by the police department or by the provincial jail administration. Next is workhouse, jail, farm, or camp. This institution house minimum custody offenders serving short sentences. Like the ordinary jail, they may be operated by the city police department or by the provincial jail administration. So what are the types of jails based on inmate population? Type A, Type B, Type C. Pagka more than 100, that is Type A. Pag 21 to 90, Type B. Pag 20 and below, Type C. So thank you very much, and I do hope that you learned a lot from this video discussion. If you love this video, please don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe to the professor, and hit the notification bell for you to be updated for my next video upload. Thank you.